it has cost taxpayers billions of dollars to send all that food waste to landfill. New York City spends about $200 million a year exporting food waste that's in the garbage to landfill.
Just food.
Just food waste. New York City's do a pretty good job recycling. So they recycle about 50% of their recyclables, which means that the actual amount of food waste in the garbage isn't 40% because we've taken out the recyclables. It's more like 60% to 70% of what's going to landfill is actually food waste. And that represents $200 million plus a year of taxpayer money that New York City is using to send food waste to landfill.
Welcome to the Shaping Science podcast, where we talk with experts from science, academia, industry, and beyond to explore the latest in research, education, and innovation for the public good. I'm Nick Dirks. I'm the president and CEO of the New York Academy of Sciences, and today I'm joined by Ron Gonen for a conversation about the benefits of the circular economy, innovations in sustainability, and the need for public-private partnerships to try to deal with the challenges. Ron Gonen is an environmental entrepreneur, investor, and author who is the founder and CEO of Closed Loop Partners, a New York-based investment firm building the circular economy. A former Deputy Commissioner of Sanitation in New York City, Gonen has long been a leader in sustainable innovation, public-private partnerships, and zero-waste initiatives. He's the author of The Waste-Free World: How the Circular Economy Will Take Less, Make More, and Save the Planet. A big title and something about which we are very interested here at the New York Academy of Sciences. Ron Gonen, welcome to Shaping Science.
Nick, great to be here.
So Ron, let me start, as I often do in these conversations, by asking how you got into issues of sanitation. I mean, garbage collection is a wonderful and important enterprise. And when you're in New York, sanitation means a lot of things. It often means the success or failure of a mayoral administration. But you were at the heart of that. But how did you get there? You majored in history as an undergraduate. Then you went to business school. So how does that take you into the Bloomberg administration and sanitation?
I was fortunate to have two early experiences that really set the foundation for my career. The first experience I had was I grew up with a single mom, lower middle class. Had to get a job when I was kind of 12, 13, 14 for spending money. And as luck would have it, the person I started working for, Paul Macht, was one of the first green architects in America. And even though I was just there babysitting their kids and fixing stuff around the house, Paul used to talk to me about all these concepts around sustainability. And so that was my first introduction to the space, really in the late 80s, early 90s. And then in high school, I was president of student government. And after I got elected, a teacher came up to me and said, your first initiative should be to get rid of all the single-use plastic in the cafeteria. We should only be using silverware that we wash. And this was, let's call it circa 1992. And something just clicked in me that that's a great idea. And so that was my first sustainability initiative, which goes back to high school, which was getting rid of all the single-use plastic in our cafeteria. And so that's where the foundation came from in terms of sustainability. In terms of waste and recycling, I started my career in management consulting at what is today Accenture, and then went on to business school here at Columbia with really the intent to become an entrepreneur in the sustainability space. And in my first few weeks, I got a call from a friend of mine, Patrick Fitzgerald, from high school, who said, hey, I have this idea of, is there a way to weigh the amount people recycle and reward them for that? And this is circa 2002. And I said, hey, that's a great idea. I could build the software and the business model behind that. And he said, well, that's why I'm calling you. And we partnered together to build what became Recycle Bank, which was my first company in the waste and recycling space that was founded in 2002.
So you build Recycle Bank. You get into this business. This is after you finished at Columbia Business School.
Actually, while I was at Columbia Business School, I started the business. I literally started going to professors and saying, I've started my business. That means that I'm in your class to extract the things I need to run my business, nothing more. The grade doesn't matter to me. And some professors were really excited about that concept, and other professors less so. But I started the company while in business school, and actually my seed investor ended up being a fund at Columbia Business School called the Lang Fund.
Well, there you go. That's one of the great benefits of a business school like Columbia. But I worked at Columbia for a long time, so I'm obviously prejudiced here. But how do you go from Recycle Bank to being Deputy Commissioner for Sanitation in the Bloomberg administration?
Sure. So I had exited my company in 2010. So I ran as the CEO from 2002 to 2010 and was kind of thinking about what's my next thing. I was in my early 30s. I'd had this amazing experience of building and running a company for 7 years. And I was looking for something that would give me the same impact rush. And at the same time, there was a deputy mayor, Cass Holloway, in the Bloomberg administration, and another person in the Bloomberg administration, Rit Argawala, who is the present day chief climate officer and DP commissioner. But back in the Bloomberg administration, he was the first head of long-term planning and sustainability. And Cass and Rit had gotten together and looked at how New York City had been handling waste and saw that the city was spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year exporting waste to out-of-state landfills. And they saw that not only was that not financially sustainable, it also wasn't sustainable from an environmental standpoint, and started looking for a way to disrupt how the sanitation department had traditionally operated, reimagine the sanitation department. And Rit had a connection to me. And we started talking, and one thing led to another. And I found that my next step in my career was the Deputy Commissioner for Sanitation, Recycling, and Sustainability in the Bloomberg administration. And it's really to the credit of Cass and Rit and their foresight of what was possible in New York City from a circular economy standpoint before the term was really commonplace, that created the opportunity for me.
So how many years did you spend in
3 years,
the administration?
Most of the last term of the Bloomberg administration.
So you leave the administration more or less with Mike Bloomberg, and then where do we get to closed loop? How does that develop?
Yeah. So the unique thing about going into government to work for an elected official is the day you start, you know what your last day is going to be, which is their last day in office.
Except that, I mean, he did get a third term.
We did get that was unique, right? So you could have been in. That is correct.
Clear, but
you could have been in the second term and thinking it was going
to end.
You
were mostly in the third term.
I was mostly in the third term.
So you knew that was
so I knew when I was joining at the beginning of the third term that this was a 3-year stint and really a race to get as much done as I possibly could. And to the credit of Mayor Bloomberg, Cass Holloway, Rit Argawala, and the amazing people that work at the Department of Sanitation, we were able to get a lot done in those 3 years. But you do know that this job has a final date to it. I started thinking about what do I want to do next? And I saw this amazing opportunity to start shifting from a linear economy, extract a natural resource, use it once in the production of a good, dispose of it in a landfill, start the extraction process again, do that billions and billions of times over and over and over again. I saw an opportunity to transition from that system to a circular system where you're continually reusing commodities so that you can eliminate natural resource extraction or the cost of landfills. And I had had previous relationships with some of the large consumer goods companies and retailers from my first company. And so in conversations with them, I started to discuss this concept of let's start a fund with your capital to start building out this infrastructure. And they liked the idea. And that's how Closed Loop Partners got launched with a infrastructure fund originally funded by the largest retailers and consumer goods companies.
So I want to come back to the work you do through the fund later in the podcast, but let's begin by going back a little bit. You did your undergraduate work in history. As you know, I do some history and some anthropology. So I'm fascinated by how we got to a world that was a linear kind of economy. Because if you go back a ways, it was a circular economy. Notions of reuse were commonplace. In many, many societies in the pre-modern age, these kinds of issues around waste were certainly not the problems that they've become in the modern industrial world. So give us a little bit of insight, and you talk a little bit about, or you write a little bit about this in your book, how we got to be so linear and where notions of obsolescence and planned obsolescence and so on and so forth became, as it were, fundamental to a certain kind of capitalist regime. You work within a capitalist regime, but nevertheless, there are trajectories that have led to some of the problems that we have today that are profoundly based in economic ideas, at least, of profitability and sales and so on and so forth. So, I'd love for you to give the listeners and viewers of our podcast a little bit of a sense of the history of obsolescence.
Mm-hmm. So, if we go back pre-World War II, 1945, not that long ago, I want to just paint a picture
Mm-hmm.
of what life was like. And again, not that long ago. First,
so we're not even going to hunters and gatherers in sub-Saharan Africa.
My grandparents were in their 20s and 30s, and I'm not that old. I just turned 50. So when we're talking about 1945, it's not that long ago. Planes, trains, and automobiles existed. But let's go back to that time for a moment, and I'll set the stage. There was no such thing as a consumer plastic in 1945. People have a perception that plastic has been around forever, or at least since the dawn of the industrial age in the early 1800s. Plastic was not introduced into the American consumer space until the mid-1950s and didn't really become commonplace until the 1970s. Plastic bags were not introduced into the American consumer space until the 1970s, which is why, by the way, the transition from plastic bags being everywhere to plastic bag bans has been so successful. Because contrary to what the opposition was saying, that it's going to crush the American economy and it's going to end consumerism, it's like, nah, plastic bags have been around since, the 70s. Plenty of commerce happened before the 1970s. But to set the stage, pre-1945, there was no plastic in the system, number one. Number two is the messaging that we received from the government was that the reuse and the recycling of commodities, namely metal, was your highest patriotic duty. And that was the literal messaging we got. And that was for a few reasons. Number one, the cost and effort involved in mining ore and turning it into a metal was very, very expensive. And so for our own national interest, we needed to continually reuse the metal. Glass was very energy intensive to make. So again, we needed to reuse our glass. And the great thing about metal and glass is that they're infinitely reusable. You can reuse them over and over and over again, and they can last forever and ever and ever.
Mm-hmm.
We go to museums all over the world and see glass bottles from 2,000 years ago that people used. So that's pre-1945. Something that happened post-1945 that actually President Eisenhower warned us about in a very famous speech, using a term that you just used, which is the industrial complex. He gave a famous speech saying, coming out of World War II, we now have this massive military industrial complex that was built to win the war. And there were two benefits. Number one, it helped us win World War II and defeat the Nazis. Number two is it helped us end the Depression. And it's important for people to understand that before World War II, the U.S. was suffering through a depression that none of us could possibly imagine what the economic suffering was like in America. And so the fact that we had this massive military industrial complex, it's not conspiratorial, it's not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing that we had it. But Eisenhower recognized that now that there was no Great War, this industrial complex was going to look to continue to feed upon itself. And that ultimately became what we know today as the consumer society, which was instead of making weapons, let's make products for people. And in order for that to be successful, what we started to see was the growth of Madison Avenue, which was portrayed amazingly in Mad Men. So pre-1945, there really wasn't much of an advertising industry in America. It was there, of course, and there's advertisements and so on and so forth. But post-1945, we saw this massive growth of this advertising industry because this industrial complex had to push out the message that reuse and recycling is not your highest patriotic duty. It's not where you gain status. Your highest patriotic duty and where you gain status
Is to consume.
Is to consume. It's to show that you got 2 cars, you got a boat, you got a second house, you got all kinds of toys for your kids. Like you got a basement just to fill with stuff that you bought. And we just got pounded and pounded and pounded with that messaging.
But let me just stop you for a second, just to go back a little bit before where you're picking up the story. And then, of course, I want to get into particular kinds of commodities and in particular begin with plastic, which is, of course, a major, major issue and one that has begun, obviously, to commandeer our attention, but which still, is something that we're concerned about, and we're concerned about it not just in our oceans or in our landfill, but also in terms of forever chemicals and so on and so forth, which is not only about plastic, but begins with it. But plastic itself, of course, gets developed and used a lot during World War II. It becomes an invaluable commodity for basically quick and relatively cheap production of military hardware and equipment and so on and so forth. And so, plastic, begins there. And then, as you say, it becomes something that is part of not just a consumer economy, but it's also part of the conveniences that are being introduced to households in the post-World War II period. But going back before, you tell a story in your book about the light bulb. And I'd like you to, if you would, rehearse that, because it's the principle of obsolescence in some sense didn't just happen.
It's a great question. And I think you mentioned my undergraduate degree is in history. And we oftentimes like to look for singular events that changed history. In reality, there are oftentimes multiple events that look like disparate events, but when you look back, you realize actually set the stage for what becomes a monumental movement. And so the story that you're referring to is the original light bulbs that were introduced into the market. This is at the turn of the 20th century, so 1900s. Thomas Edison has developed the light bulb, which completely changes society. Before that, you wanted light, you needed to have gasoline or kerosene and so on and so forth. The original light bulbs that were introduced into the market could last almost to infinitum, okay? People loved the product. They were like, I get one of these light bulbs, and I literally have light from this singular light bulb for decades.
And there were no jokes about changing light bulbs.
Amazing technology. It's one of the rare instances in the history of technology where the first version that was introduced was almost perfect. Mm-hmm. There was very little iteration that was required. The first light bulb that comes into the market just lasts forever. No one needs to change it. No one needs to, and here's the key word, buy another one. Okay. All of the light bulb companies realize they have a problem, which is once they sell one light bulb, they're never selling another one to a customer. And so, and this is well documented. Uh, the major light bulb companies in the United States, Europe, and Japan decide to collude together to make sure that light bulbs can only have a certain lifespan, to ensure that people will have to buy multiple light bulbs over the course of their life. And there was actually a financial penalty that this consortium would enforce upon members if they allowed a light bulb into the market that would last longer than what the consortium had decided. So it's a great question, and it's a great example of kind of one of these first events that took place that later on would lead to this transition away from a linear economy to from what was a circular economy to a linear economy. Today, those executives would go to jail.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, because of the collusion,
it's
antitrust
collusion,
law,
right?
and so on and so forth. But secondly, obviously, this would be the complete opposite of any kind of commitment to sustainability.
Yeah. But today, you would go to jail. That the policymakers recognize that type of collusion is as anti-capitalist as you can possibly get, and around the same time, we were developing anti-monopolistic policies to ensure that didn't happen. But back then, you could still do it, and it's maybe the only example that I can think of until OPEC of a international monopolistic system. Prior to that, you would see those types of monopolistic systems that were against free market policies and against consumer preference develop in, the U.S. or in Europe. But that's the only instance I can think of where it was literally global.
So let's move then forward and pick up the story of plastic. Clearly plastic produced out of what is increasingly inexpensive petroleum that is flooding the world market, and the post-World War II period becomes critical to the production of many kinds of consumer goods. And of course, it's often, very convenient, easy to use, and helpful for also making available a lot of consumer products at a much lower cost than was the case with things that were made of metal or glass or what have you, and without a kind of sensibility of the problems of waste and so on and so forth. There seemed to be no break on the production and the circulation of plastic as a new resource that could be used for everything from household kitchen appliances and goods to clothes and a whole new generation of fabrics and so on and so forth. And you, of course, write a lot about fashion waste, and we'll get to that in a second. But could you give us a kind of thumbnail sketch of how plastic has effectively takes over a certain kind of consumer market?
Sure. And I want to be clear. It's since we have an audience here that's focused on science, there's a lot of good things to plastic, and there's a lot of bad things to plastic. But that's not uncommon in scientific developments or in technological developments. The most obvious example that we see today is probably the internet and social media. Like, there's lots of benefits to the internet. There's lots of bad things to the internet. If we think about it from an energy or a resource standpoint, like, there's lots of good things to nuclear energy. There's lots of really horrible things to nuclear energy. Even wind energy. There's lots of amazing things that wind energy provides as a benefit. It can also disrupt the ecosystem. When it comes to plastic, the best example I'll give to that is before we used petroleum that we effectively mined from the ground to make plastic, we were killing whales, and whales almost went extinct. So there was a period of time in which animal lovers and nature lovers looked at the development of being able to use petroleum that was coming out of the ground as an energy source as a major environmental benefit. It was going to save the whale population. But As we became smarter and smarter and more efficient in terms of extracting petroleum out of the ground, uh, first as an energy source, we also began to realize that you could turn it into this new type of product called plastic that was very, very lightweight and easy to shape and transform. And this is where the fossil fuel question becomes really important and oftentimes distorted when it comes from a scientific standpoint, in that most people who are against plastic are against it because of its fossil fuel use. But if you look at the alternatives, I'll take glass, for instance. Glass is very energy intensive to produce. And the energy oftentimes used to produce that glass is a fossil fuel. And glass is also very heavy to transport. And so the energy or the fuel, the fossil fuel required to ship glass versus shipping plastic is much greater. And so oftentimes when you look at the scientific data, net, what did I use more fossil fuel in, that plastic product or that glass product or that aluminum product? There's a lot of data inputs that go in. One is how much energy did you actually use in the production of it, and how much energy did you use in the transportation of it. So I do want to give that background around plastic. There's a lot of good to plastic. There's a lot of bad to plastic. But plastic begins to be introduced as a consumer product in the 50s and 60s. And one of the things that scientists begin to recognize very early on is that if it's not handled properly, it can be highly toxic to people and to the natural environment. And I would say that rather than the industry recognizing that and trying to resolve for that using science, it instead attacked the scientists who were trying to point that out and help people, namely Rachel Carson.
Indeed. Okay, well, we should come back to Rachel Carson. But of course, when we talk about plastics, I can't help but remember the movie The Graduate, where Dustin Hoffman, is famously told when he's looking for a career after college, plastics, my boy, plastics.
So there will be some audience members who know exactly what you're talking
no,
about,
many will
and
not,
some that don't. But you're bringing up a really important point, which is most Americans today think that plastic has been ubiquitous for the last 200-300 years. Back to my earlier comments, in fact, it really became ubiquitous in the 60s and 70s. And The Graduate was a very famous movie that came out in the mid 60s, and a recommendation that a friend of a college kid's parents is giving him about what profession to go into that's this nascent but emerging profession in the 1960s is plastics.
So let's talk about some of the other items that, well, actually, before that, I want to just go, fast forward to some of the contemporary debates taking place, not just about plastics in general, but about plastics that are made from certain kinds of waste that often are said to be electronic. And I'm talking about black plastic and the kinds of warnings that have gone out recently about using black plastic utensils for food storage, for food consumption, for spatulas, especially when used with heat to cook, and so on and so forth. Again, there are all kinds of warnings that come out, and then people are asking, have the scientists really looked at this? Is it really going to be something that could be potentially injurious to health, and so on and so forth? But plastic now is made from all kinds of sources. Is that not the case?
It's still mostly so. The good news is you can make a plastic out of multiple chemical compounds. Petroleum is just one of them, but you can use other organic compounds to make plastic, and that's what we know as bioplastic or compostable plastic. But I think the important thing from a science to health to edibility standpoint is that whether you're talking about a petroleum-based plastic, a bio-based plastic, aluminum cans, glass bottles, these are not compounds that human beings should be digesting. So glass is made out of sand. I wouldn't recommend anybody to start digesting sand. Maybe it's not as harmful as digesting oil, but it's still harmful. And so the scientific question really comes down to, how do you produce consumer products that when used at a certain temperature do not degrade, because the degrading of the product at that temperature is what is going to seep into what the person is eating. And that's the scientific question. Now, when you're dealing with the media and advocates on both sides, we live in a world today which, science is the last thing they want to hear about. But ultimately, that's the scientific question that will lead to what's best for us as humans, citizens, consumers.
So let's talk about some other issues that are, major ingredients, as it were, in the waste economy. And you write about these in your book, about food, about fashion, about metals. So could we take each one and ask you to say a little bit about food waste and, what are the dimensions of the problem and what are some of the things that are being done to try to combat it?
Food waste is the largest part of the waste stream. It represents
the largest
part of the waste stream. It represents about 40% of the waste stream. The second largest part of the waste stream is actually recyclable material, paper, metal, glass, and plastic at about 35%. But the largest part of the waste stream is food waste. And that varies depending on the country. So the U.S., we're by far the most wasteful. You go to poorer countries, you'll see much less food waste because everything is being consumed. But food waste is the largest part of the waste stream. And traditionally, going back to the 1950s to today, most of it has been sent to landfill. Now, there's a number of issues with that. First, let me touch on something that's an important paradigm shift for people to understand about waste, and something that I think the extractive industries and the landfill industries did that if you had like an evil genius award, would maybe be in the Hall of Fame. It was to ensure that waste was never priced as a utility, but priced as a cost of the commons. And what I mean by that is when we pay for water at the household level. Somebody wants to just use way too much water than they need, that's their decision to do, and they will pay for it. Someone wants to conserve water and save money, all the more power to them. They will save money for doing that. Same thing on electricity. You want to keep the lights on all over the place in your house, even when you're gone, run your AC all the time. You have the right to do that, but you will pay for it. You want to be somebody who always make sure the lights are off when they're not in the room and so on and so forth. That's your right to, and you will benefit from that because you won't spend a lot. Now let's think about waste for a moment. Waste is a cost of the commons, not a personal utility. You could be someone who's massively wasteful, buys all kinds of stuff you don't need, never recycles, throws it in the garbage. Your neighbor could be somebody who is very conscious about not buying things they don't need and making sure they recycle everything. Those two neighbors share in the cost of disposal to the landfill. In a way, that cost is buried in the tax bill. And so it completely takes away the incentive from the citizen to change their behavior or really understand their behavior. And that was intentional to make sure that waste was not priced as a utility, but instead a cost of the commons. And so the majority of food waste traditionally gone to landfill. The paradigm shift that's important there is that's not, woe is us, it's too bad, I wish we were composting. That is, it has cost taxpayers billions of dollars to send all that food waste to landfill. New York City spends about $200 million a year exporting food waste that's in the garbage to landfill.
Just food waste.
New York City's do a pretty good job recycling. So they recycle about 50% of their recyclables, which means that the actual amount of food waste in the garbage isn't 40% because we've taken out the recyclables. It's more like 60% to 70% of what's going to landfill is actually food waste. And that represents $200 million plus a year of taxpayer money that New York City is using to
Now,
send food waste to
recently,
landfill.
New York City has introduced compost
Yes.
facilities
Yes.
on street corners and so on and so
Yes.
forth. Has that begun to make a difference in terms of the overall cost of food waste disposal?
Yes. And to give you an example of that paradigm shift, that's a program we started in the Bloomberg administration. If it's okay, I want to tell just a quick story about that experience.
Please.
It shines a light on that paradigm. When we decided to roll that out in the Bloomberg administration, we did roll it out in some of the more progressive neighborhoods, but we also decided, let's pick one of the more conservative neighborhoods in Staten Island and get them involved in the program. And so I went out to help distribute the brown bins, and I was running back and forth from the sanitation department, City Hall, to do the bin. So I was the one guy in a suit, not in a jumpsuit. And this guy comes out of his house in Staten Island, and I mean, he's just ready to tear into me. And he walks up to me and he says, I'm tired of this Bloomberg nanny state stuff. This is bullshit. Sorry to curse on your podcast, but I want to make sure I got the quote exact. This is bullshit. We can't keep spending money on these liberal progressive policies. And he's just going on and on. This was like a merger of Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, Tucker Carlson, like all in one coming my way. And after he was done, I said, can I just explain the economics of the program to you for 1 minute? And then right now it's voluntary. So you can participate. You don't have to participate. And he said, fine. I said, look, if you don't participate, just keep putting your food waste in the garbage. It's voluntary. No one's going to say a thing. But I want you to understand that we will use you and your neighbor's tax dollars to send it to out-of-state landfills. Instead, if you put your food waste in this brown bin, we will take it over to a compost facility that the city owns in Staten Island that employs people who live in Staten Island. We will turn it into compost that the city will then use in its parks instead of using tax dollars to buy compost. That's the program. Kind of looked at me and was like, why hasn't anyone ever explained that to me? I'll definitely participate, and I'll tell my neighbors to participate. So the first thing about food waste is having that paradigm shift that if we don't stop sending food waste to landfill, we're just wasting tax dollars. The second part of food waste is that it's an incredible energy and product source. Food waste can be converted into natural gas via anaerobic digestion, or it can be converted into compost, which is a fertilizer through compost. And so we have a huge opportunity with all of the food waste we have to create an alternative clean energy source or compost. That's food waste. Glad to go into even more detail, but
okay, let's. That's the
highlight of food waste.
That it's the largest proportion of
Yes.
waste is really, I think, probably comes as news to most people.
From a if you think about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, people tend to think about like automobiles and oil as this big GHG driver. The second largest emitter of GHG emissions globally are open air landfills. Only the US, Europe, and Japan, Korea, Australia have closed landfills. Most of the rest of the world, landfills are open, which means all that food waste is just sitting and rotting in landfills, emitting methane. And that's why landfills are the second largest emitter of GHG emissions in the world. So whether it's because you care deeply about efficient government and your tax dollars, whether it's because you care about climate change and GHG emissions, whether it's because you care about seeing renewable energy grow in the United States, there's lots of reasons for everyone across the political spectrum to be excited about diverting food waste.
Well, it's good to have arguments that play to different kinds of political positions. This has become obviously a hugely polarized issue. You've just given an example of it. But if you have arguments that, as it were, can play both sides of the political debate, that clearly is going to be more and more important today to get any kind of traction. But let's move from food to fashion, because we all wear clothes, we all eat food, but we all wear clothes. But we tend much more now than ever before with the new kinds of H&M and so on and so forth, mass production of fashionable clothing, buy more than we use and use clothes, for a certain period of time, but then just give it away, whether to a Goodwill or just put it in the trash. How big a factor is that, and what might we be able to do about it?
I would call fashion the last frontier of the uh, costly consumer culture we live in. It started with consumer products, and then the wasting of all this food we have. Um, but I would say 20 years ago, with the introduction of fast fashion, we saw the percentage of clothing and apparel in the waste stream grow exponentially. So up until about 25 years ago, um, apparel was approximately 1 or 2% of the waste stream. Uh, Today, it represents about 8% of the waste stream. And again, we can look at it from a cost standpoint of in New York City, that's about $50 million a year of taxpayer money landfilling clothes, total waste. You can look at it from an environmental standpoint of there's a lot of clothes that have plastics in them. It's polyester that if they end up in a river someplace, no different than plastic ending up. And it's something that needs to be fixed. And I think it's also something that's representative of a dysfunctional part of our free market capitalist system. And I think one thing that I have a personal and professional goal for is to help people recognize that free markets and capitalism is very much aligned with environment and sustainability. And the fissure between the two was really a scam perpetrated by uh, industries that had self-interested motivations and making people think that there was this fissure. But in fact, there's not. And I'm going to use fashion as an example.
Mm-hmm.
There are companies that produce very cheap clothes using almost slave labor and sell them in the U.S. marketplace. People buy them, they use them a few times because they're really not high quality. They throw them away. Now we get to the cost of the commons, which is I may not buy those clothes. You may not buy those clothes. The majority of the population may not buy those clothes. But everybody is going to share in the cost of disposing of those clothes, except for one entity, the producer. So we've created a supposedly free market system where a company can produce a very cheap product, sell it for a very high margin, put the money in the bank, and then push the disposal cost of that product onto the commons. That's as anti-free market and capitalist as you can get. What should happen is we should say as free marketers and capitalists, you're welcome to sell that cheap product, that cheap t-shirt, those cheap jeans into the market. Free market capitalism, we love it, go for it. But you will be responsible for its disposal. Once you do that, that fast fashion model doesn't work anymore. That model only works if the public is willing to subsidize the disposal of it.
So, getting to a point where, the kinds of costs that you're describing associated with waste, with disposal, and so on and so forth are, shared by the producers and the immediate users rather than the commons. And that's going to be difficult. But you've been working on coming up with all kinds of ways to actually close that, as it were, loop, along with, thinking about new kinds of ways to make clothing or to think about food waste or so on and so forth. But could you say something about the closed loop kind of proposals that you have been supporting through your fund?
Sure. Well, first, from a policy standpoint, the good news is we are now seeing the expansion of what's called EPR policy in the United States. This has worked very successfully in many parts of Europe, namely Northern Europe. But EPR is extended producer responsibility, and it's a concept where the producers. Right now, it's just on the consumer product side. So think products sold by Coke, Pepsi, Unilever, Procter and Gamble, Nestle, so on and so forth, who, to their credit, are now starting to recognize we actually want these commodities back in our supply chain. One thing that is important for listeners to understand is Coke and PepsiCo, they don't own plastics companies. They don't own packaging companies. There's actual alignment there. If they can get access to sufficient amount of recycled content, that's what they would prefer to use. And so EPR is a concept where those brands pay a small fee for every product they sell. That goes into a fund that municipalities and private companies can use to build circular economy infrastructure. And because so much product is sold, the fee can be relatively small to generate large dollars. 7 states in the past 3 years have passed EPR legislation in partnership with the brands and environmental organizations and municipal governments. And I'm hoping to see EPR expand to most states over the next few years. We need to see something similar in the fashion and apparel space, which is once you sell your product, you either need to take it back after the consumer doesn't want to use it anymore. And there's already examples of that. Patagonia, for instance, has been doing that for a decade. Again, back to my point of there is actual great alignment between free market capitalism and being sustainable. Patagonia is one of the most profitable and successful companies in the apparel industry. They're doing just fine. And they take back everything, and they've been doing it for a decade. So you either need to be an apparel company that's willing to take back your product, recycle it, refurbish it, resell it, or you need to pay a fee for everything that you sell to fund the infrastructure to recycle those products. Now, from an innovation standpoint, there are new types of materials being developed so that we don't have to rely on growing cotton. Which is very water intensive, very chemically intensive, or using polyester. So one example of that is we have a portfolio company called Algae, which is using algae that is grown in the Negev Desert in Israel. It's actually a company that grows the algae for mostly the vitamin industry. It's actually the coating on vitamins. But this entrepreneur and innovator recognized that she could also use that industrially grown algae to produce what feels like a luxury cotton. And so now you can have a fabric that feels like what we know to be cotton, but didn't require all of the land and the water and the chemicals involved in cotton, as an example. We have a company called Dimpora in Switzerland that's a material science company that's creating a lab-based alternative to Gore-Tex, which is a great product. Keeps us warm and dry in horrible elements, but it's also highly toxic. So that's an example on the material science side. We're seeing technologies come along that are making fabrics more sustainable. And then on the end of use side, obviously there's been tremendous growth in resale platforms, which is important. Not super high tech, not super scientific, but very effective. And then on the highly scientific side, there's now companies and technologies emerging. On the cotton side, we have a portfolio company called Evernew that can deconstruct cotton clothing back to the base fiber. So you can now remanufacture a new product. So they can take a pair of Levi jeans, put it through their chemical process, deconstruct the jean back to these base cotton fibers, and make another pair of jeans out of it. There are now companies that can take polyester clothing and effectively depolymerize the polyester back to the base monomer, and now you can make another shirt. And so that's an exciting development.
You know, science has brought a lot of these problems our way in certain kinds of respects. We talked about that at the beginning. But science is also helping develop solutions. And this is part of what we try to do here in our podcast, which is to feature the way in which science can shape the future in a way that will be better for the public than has been the case throughout some parts of our history. But, you know, Ron, we've run out of time. I haven't even got to a series of questions I wanted to ask you about electronic vehicles and batteries and metals and how you think about that. Other questions as well that we haven't gotten to. So I'm hoping that we can entice you back to our studio at some future time to continue the conversation. But thank you so much, Ron, for joining us today. This wraps up our episode of the Shaping Science podcast. Hope you will join us again in the future very soon. To learn more about the New York Academy of Sciences, including information on upcoming events, visit us online at nyas.org and follow us at NIAS Sciences. Shaping Science is made possible with the generous support of Tata Sons.